In our new series, And Then What?, we're following up on news headlines that you read, but then maybe you don't hear much about afterwards. This month, we're talking public lands sell-off. What's happening? How can you help? We break down the process and how you can have an impact. Stay tuned after the episode to hear our latest edition of And Then What? The Diaries is supported by Trail Angels. A lot of us have been there. Something goes wrong. It rains for 5 straight days while we're on the trail. Someone slips, needs some stitches. And the world seems to know it. A trail angel swoops in and makes a tough situation better. Trail magic is an incredible thing to witness and feel. And right now there is a global network of trail angels, aka Diaries Plus members, that power this project and help us bring our show to 100,000 subscribers. A few people are going a little out of their way to make something incredible happen. And it's easy to be a part of and ensure that we keep doing our best work. You join the Diaries, you become part of a movement, and you keep this project running for this generation of thru hikers and dirtbags and the next. So if this show has helped you out, it's helped you see a path through life, help you make a change or chase a dream, please consider doing the same for others. The link is in the show notes, or you can find it on our website. Spread the love, give a little trail magic, support the Diaries Plus. Marco, I'm curious, have you ever seen Forrest Gump, the movie? I feel like that's I don't think that film is so specific to an age demographic, but I'm curious.
No, I mean, I think it came out like a year before I was born, but I definitely remember watching it as a young kid, with all my cousins back in the day, for sure. It was definitely a very memorable, movie-going experience as a kid.
If, for some reason, you do not know Forrest Gump is this story about a simple hero, a character who would be considered neurodivergent or a mentally disabled man, who somehow weaves his way through these complex chapters in American history, driven by love, grief, friendship, and kindness.
Yeah, it's a bit like Boomer Catnip.
You said it, not me. But I think it also resonated with so many people because it asked a question: what would happen if we lived a little bit more with our hearts and let our brains and biases and preconceived ideas get out of the way? What would happen if we opened ourselves a little bit more to the experience? And we're talking about it because it contains one 6-minute montage, which probably introduced most of the American public to somewhat of a radical idea. Running didn't have to be about winning a track and field event. It could take you places beyond a track to these moments of transcendence. You didn't have to do it for a cause. It had the potential to be healing and maybe even fun. And maybe it wasn't about going fast, but about going far.
Yeah, so you're saying it's probably the first time ultra running was depicted in Hollywood.
Yeah, I think so. That's why if you enter any big race, you're still likely to see someone rocking a pair of Nike Cortez shoes and a Bubba Gump hat on. A few audacious people made their own runs across America, but one of the true holy grails of running still remained. Something so burly, so ridiculous, so committing and time-consuming, so superhuman that no one was ready to toe that line.
The complete Forrest Gump journey. Today, we sit down with Rob Pope, runner, veterinarian, and Forrest Gump aficionado, who followed through on an idea so insane it could have only come from Hollywood.
Using images and research, Pope recreated the more than 15,000-mile journey, crossing America almost 5 times, all while dressed as Forrest, in a feat that could only be described as either insane or superhuman. I guess there really isn't much of a difference between those two. Since his years spent traversing America, he's become fascinated by a topic: how do humans step past what they think they're capable of and become super? I'm Fitz Cahal.
I'm Marco Seiler Gonzalez.
You're listening to the Dirtbag Diaries. I'm curious, like whether the little kid Rob remembers the first time you saw Forrest Gump. Like, how old were you?
Oh wow, yeah, I'm older than I look, mate. So I was probably in my sort of mid-teens, and I was probably thinking how lousy this film was compared to Shawshank Redemption and Pulp Fiction at the time, because I was trying to be cool, but secretly I liked Forrest Gump more than both of them.
Do you have like the movie, like, is it like all encoded in your brain?
Certainly, those 7.5 minutes of epic gloriousness are. Because I probably watched that scene about 200 times, especially when we were going, just where is this place? Just need to find this place. And so one of them I actually found not long after I'd returned home from the States, which is I won't name the exact location because the poor farmer will have 100 people turning up on his plot tomorrow, but it's in Vermont. And I actually ran about a mile down the road from it. I never knew I was so close to film history.
Mm. At what point did it go from merely like thinking to yourself, gotta love Forrest Gump, to maybe I should run across America just like Forrest Gump did? Like, essentially, like, life began to imitate art. Like, when did that happen?
The Forrest Gump thing came way down the line. The desire to run across America happened first. That actually happened once I read a book by an English chap called Nick Baldock called, I think it's pretty much just called Running Across America. Did what it says on the tin, you know? And it's just the way he described, just moving at a slow pace. It was just like a great sort of travel journal, you know. Kansas is so much more interesting when you're moving at 5 miles an hour, you know. And I read this book probably about, I don't know, 15 years or so before I actually set off to the States, and always had this dream of one day putting my shoes on, but I didn't expect they were going to be Nike Cortez. That developed with time. You do your research on the route, and if you're doing that, you can't help but come across Forrest. You know, Run Across America, Forrest Gump. Somebody does a long run, the new Forrest Gump. You know, the Australian Forrest Gump, the female Forrest Gump. But I wanted to Run Across America to satisfy like an athletic ambition, but also to do something pretty cool for charity. And to do that, you've got to do something that grabs people's attention. So I was mostly looking at bigger routes, you know, maybe doing it twice, maybe going from corner to corner. But loads of things had been done. But it was almost as if there was a huge elephant in the room and nobody had done the Forrest Gump thing. And I found this like ridiculous. I was just like, what? But then you look at it and go, well, it's pretty huge. It's just probably why no one's done it. You know, it is the equivalent effectively of almost running around the world. And I remember reading an article about a chap who had completed the Forrest Gump run, and I just had this visceral feeling of being sick, as if it was like, you know, somebody had stolen something from me. It wasn't mine to take, but it just felt that was my thing gone. And then I read the article, and he'd only, in inverted commas, done the second leg, which is Santa Monica through to Maine, Port Clyde. And I was discussing this with my girlfriend, now my wife, and she went, mate, this is it. This is the sign. You know, somebody else is probably reading this feeling sick right now. And so you guys stick the knife in before they do it to you.
I feel like on one hand, this is like such low hanging fruit that nobody, you know, like there's all these like the Australian Forrest Gump, but no one's done the real thing.
Yeah.
and then it's like all of a sudden the race is on. And it's sort of funny because like walk us through the actual route, like how many miles, like what do you have to average a day? My knowledge of it is that it's not just like back and forth on the same thing. It's like you went all over the place. Talk to me like what recreating that cinematic journey actually looked like.
Yeah, well, every journey's got a start and an end, right? And so we know where Forrest started and we know where he ended. Well, he started in Greenbow, Alabama, but we've hit a roadblock straight away because Greenbow, Alabama doesn't exist. They made it up for the film.
How do you handle that?
Well, if you look in the movie, and when they're going through that particular scene, you see him running behind like a newscaster, and there's a very small map, and so it's still definitely Alabama. You see a dot roughly in the middle of the state, and there was a town called Greensboro near there, but it seemed a bit of a reach. And my pal was saying, well, in the book he starts from Mobile, and I thought, well, that makes much more sense. And Beulah Battery, where Bubba is from, so his best good friend, that's only 30 miles down the road, and it kind of makes sense that if these guys were getting drafted, they were probably in the same district, right? So I just thought, let's just do it from Mobile. The house that they built for the film was somewhere in South Carolina on a now private estate, and it was also built for the film and knocked down soon afterwards. So I couldn't start there. I couldn't even pretend to start from South Carolina. So I find the Bragg Mitchell Mansion in Mobile, which looks very much like the Gump boarding house, and then off a set, but only after the proper haircut, because if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. So I went into a local proper, sort of, in Liverpool, you would say this place was rough as arse, but everybody in there had a heart of gold. And after they realized I didn't have a hidden camera, they were more than happy to give me a high and tight and a cutthroat shave. And off I went. I went via Beulah Battery, and then I went across pretty much the whole of the southern states, and eventually finishing on Santa Monica Pier. And seeing as I'd run that far, figured may as well just turn around, keep on going. And so second leg, I went up through Death Valley where it snowed. That doesn't happen very often. Went through Texas once again. I seem to always be in Texas. Up the East Coast, and then I got to that glorious, iconic lighthouse in Maine, the fog swirling in, which is, in the film, it's a lovely bright summer's day, not for me. And then, on my way, went back through Chicago. That glorious mountain lake is in Glacier National Park, so I headed up there. Then I went down to the West Coast. Nobody knows where Forrest actually hit the ocean for the third time because it's not named. You just see it roughly on the map. And so not long after I ran through Washington, I had to cross back into Washington, actually, because sadly, Oregon, pretty much the whole place was on fire when I went there. And then I had to drop down south, and I got to Bandon, which is just by where Steve Prefontaine was born and lived. And I basically, stopped at the ocean in Bandon Beach and became, I think, the first person ever to run across America 3 times in a year, which is nice.
On to San Francisco?
Yeah, San Francisco. So that was the 10,000 mile mark up at this point. Just literally, just over a year at this point. Then San Francisco, up through Utah, through the Salt Flats, Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, Tennessee for the second time. And then I finished that fourth crossing and my final ocean in the town of Port Royal, which is by Beaufort, South Carolina. And that is pretty much where all of the filming was done for Forrest Gump, so where the shrimp boat comes in after the storm, that's where the box of chocolates, that's where the chocolate shop is. And then one final turn and all the way to Flagstaff, took a right turn up to Monument Valley. And by then I was pretty tired, so I thought I'd go home.
I mean, there's obviously so many questions in here, and not to sort of be so nerdy, but like what you did is, like, on a human level, it is quite incredible. Like it's 15,607 miles of running. You're averaging, what is 40 miles a day?
37, yeah. Like, so probably after the first, because initially I was very, very careful because, nobody starts off as a transcontinental runner, do they? And I knew what the end goal was. So I started off really delicately. So like the real average was probably, pushing mid-40s. It was freaked me out at the time. Like now I can laugh about it and I just go, God, it's mad, isn't it? But at the time, it actually weirded me out because I was just like, there's no way I'm physically capable of this. You can't do this every day. I got injuries, but I was waiting for the spectacular one that would just end it, So when I got injured, I'd be like, is this it? Is this the one that I just can't go any further with? So I'd never refer to how I was doing. I would always refer to how the run was doing. And basically, I was a part of the run. And I would just not want to think about me on the run because then I would be dwarfed by this colossal country that I was running through. It might all get a bit too much.
I'm curious, that sounds like on one level, it is resetting your mind to sort of decenter yourself from the experience on a level. But like, what else did you have to do to make your body adapt to something that could be called superhuman?
Well, initially, so I had a huge crew around me. Her name was Nadine. We bought an old camper van, and we didn't know what we were doing. We were just two kids on our way, and she'd make me lunch. I decided I could only eat ham salad sandwiches every day because it was the only thing initially that I could actually process in the Alabama and Mississippi heat. Can of pineapple Fanta, sort of as much chocolate as I could handle. So this wasn't elite nutrition. I would occasionally, pop into it if I was near a supermarket or a decent size, like sort of, pharmacy. I would buy some protein powder, but that was pretty much about it. Most of the time I would be surfing from fast food joint to another one because they had aircon. Just walking in like something the cat had dragged in, dripping sweat everywhere and asking for a Happy Meal,
It sounds like it was kind of in question really to the very end, whether or not your body would sort of be able to survive it or not explode in a traumatic or like a very dramatic sort of way. Going through all that, do you think that your body or your mind is the greatest limiter?
I think your mind is not necessarily the greatest limiter, but it certainly holds the keys because initially I was running really quite quickly for something like this. I'd be doing like 730 miles and Nadine told me like sort of, she says you're running too fast. I'm like, no, I'm not tired. It's fine. And she was just like, mate, you're like 150 miles in, that's like 1% of the journey. You need to taper it. And of course, 400 miles in, I get my first injury. And so my mind basically then had to do the sensible thing, seek advice, limit myself. And eventually, it was, you were a bit akin to, like an IndyCar driver. You had to you manage your tires, manage your fuel, everything like that. And an injury, a twinge, you'd be like, sort of, is that real? I'll monitor that for the next 10 steps. Do I alter my gait? No, stop overthinking things. And on the subject of like sort of, falling apart, big Star Wars fan, had so many Star Wars moments on that trip, especially in the desert. The stroller that I eventually used as my support vehicle after Nadine had to go home about, a quarter of the way in, I named Pram Solo because I was starting to look like Chewbacca. But my whole body was like the Millennium Falcon. We saw in Oregon that it can shift when it needed to. In Boston Marathon, I got a bit ahead of myself after I drank a Bud Light at mile 11, and I shifted then. But I was a rusting bucket of junk, like sort of with all kinds getting poured into it, and how it didn't break down somewhere on the Kessel Run, I don't know.
It's amazing. What other movies did you enact while you were in the States?
Well, I did think as another run. I think, so I've already done, Forrest Gump. I don't think Pulp Fiction would be a good one to do, but The Shawshank would be pretty good, man. Running from Cleveland through to that beach in Mexico, that'd be pretty sweet.
The Diaries is supported by Oboes. At Oboes, it's all about hiking and the passion for moving your body in nature. Their name Oboes is actually a fun little contraction of outside Bozeman, which is where the team works and creates. They use the mountains as a natural laboratory. While big shoe companies chase volume and trends and gimmicks, Oboes has stayed on trail and on point, refining and building the perfect tools for bipedal travel right in their backyard. If you've got a big summer ahead, check out the Bridger Ridge, their updated take on a classic leather hiker. I've been rocking the Catabatic LT out in the woods. It's a rugged sneaker style built for moving quickly, even when I'm not. Oboes footwear. Love hiking. All right, I have been waiting for a really long time for the sun to come out here in the Pacific Northwest. We got like a little blip a few weeks ago and then went away, but it's coming. I know it. And I know when it shows up, I'll put on sunscreen and then I'll immediately sweat it off and then I'll get sunburned because like I haven't seen the sun in like 9 months or something. And when my skin gets redder or burned or windburned, That's when I use Mayday After Sun Cream from Terns. Mayday is designed for when you've been overexposed to the elements, and I'm sure a lot of you out there can relate. It has 3 times Terns' special marine-derived complex that speeds up skin regeneration and healing. It helps minimize peeling and replenishes moisture, and that makes my skin look better, feel better, quicker. When there's so many things to think about, having a go-to product that's good for my skin is awesome. I put it on at night, go to bed, don't think about it, super easy. After Sun shouldn't be an afterthought. Use the code DIRTBAG to get 25% off your first order at Terns.com. We'll put a link in the show notes, and you can try Terns for yourself. Check it out. From weekend family rides to quick after-work hits with friends, this is the time of year when our bike rack is constantly in motion and on the truck doing the hard work. Kuat's Piston Pro X has some rad features that make it a really unique hitch rack. Integrated LED taillights. That's sweet. The pneumatic tire arms that hug your tires and not the bike frame. That's really good for your bike. And Kashima-coated struts add durability and a little extra pizzazz. And you won't need any adapters or tools to fit it for small or beefy tires, right? Just squeeze and slide the adjustable wheel chocks to hold 18 to 29-inch tires. Don't have a hitch? The Piston SR has similar features, but easily mounts on most roof crossbars. Find more details on their website, kuat.com. Kuat, because you will absolutely love this rack. Thanks for supporting the show. The run ended for you, I would say, on a pretty high life note. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, so for a start, I was in the most magical location on earth, which is just like the Navajo Nation. And, you know, if you're a spiritual person, I'm not saying religious, just whatever God you follow, or whether you just sort of believe in something around there, there's magic in that area. And I was lucky enough to kind of be embraced by sort of, you know, the Dene people. And I had a couple of the guys running with me. And on the final day, it became very much like the movie. I had around sort of 30 people running with me, including bizarrely the head of Garmin France, who just turned up to see that location with his wife. He's a big runner. And then the only time Forrest Gump has ever run that for real, he was there to see it. So he joins me. I've got locals. I've got some friends from home, some people from the amazing historic brewery in Flagstaff running down this road. And it's so surreal. But of course, I had a little extra plan. So I'd been solo for a long time. But eventually sort of Nadine was to return for the final few days with my newborn baby. I did go home for the birth, by the way, people. And then we flew back together and covered the last 200 miles with her in Gen A, my camper van. And at the end, obviously in the movie, Forrest turns around and says to people following him, you know, well, that's it, I'm going to go home. And there's a cry from the crowd going, now what are we going to do? And so I walked through the crowd and I said, you're going to have to come with me. I'm turning around. And they're like, what? You carrying on? I said, just come with me. And then I go up to Nadine and she thought I was just really tired when I got down on one knee. But we can imagine what happened next. And it's great. You know, it's not often you get a news crew to film your proposal. And she said, yes, peer pressure. It's a wonderful thing.
I know that's having the crowd for that adds to the moment, I feel like, for sure.
It did, apart from for 1 second where she was just like, no, Rob, this is weird, don't do this. And I thought, I'm getting done here. She's gonna stiff me in front of all these people. But you know, maybe she would have done if the people weren't there. So I don't care now. It's moot.
Kind of like through your career, through all this, you have been, and you've got a new podcast out there, you've been chasing after the question, like, how do you become superhuman? And I think maybe when we dive into this, like how do you actually define that term? In your mind, how would you describe what it means to be superhuman?
Well, I describe it in a different way to, I think, what most people describe it. Most people think of superhuman as something above the level that they can aspire to or that they have achieved. And that generally means look into your sports stars. If you're a runner, you might look to, like, you know, Killian Jornet, sort of, Camille Herron. If you're a climber, it might be like sort of Jesse Dufton or like Sasha Julian. But the thing is, you're a climber yourself. You're a runner yourself. So and you're also human. That's the one thing we got. We can all start in the same block. So to become superhuman means to be above the level that you are.
The other day, I was like chatting with some friends about people that do things like this, and I was trying to sort of explain my experience with it, having covered it for more than 2 decades now. They sort of threw out the idea that it seems like that those people are kind of like angsty, or there's this level of it. And I thought, well, like, yeah, sometimes that's true. But I really, like, when I described it to them, I felt like, yes, there are people that are sometimes seemingly running away from something. And then I think there's also a set of people in our world that are running towards something. And whether that's climbing or big wave surfing or like whatever it is, right? That sometimes there are some of these legends that kind of feel like, man, you could have almost just gone to therapy and this would have been easier. But then sometimes you see people running towards something. And I'm just like, I'm curious whether you found that too, having talked to a lot of the people that are sort of pressing on the limits of their human potential. Do you buy that these athletes often fall into one or two of these camps?
Yeah, well, we've all got these, personality types, but when you're achieving a huge goal like this, the only way you achieve it is if there's a massive why. There has to be a why. There's no way you can motivate yourself to get up at 5 a.m. in the morning or in the pouring rain if there isn't a why. Nobody just goes, I want to win an Olympic gold. Or why? There's always something deeper. So these angsty athletes, things might not be going their way. Of course, at the sharp end of sport, you're on edge the whole time. Some people deal with it really well. Some people deal with it not so well. As for me, my why was to basically do something to make my mum proud. And I hadn't gone searching for this, but it was something that I wanted to do. So that before she passed, she said to do one thing in my life that made a difference. And originally I thought that was just with my career. I became a veterinarian. That's helping people. That's making a difference. But as I progressed through, it gradually became clearer that that wasn't my thing. And then I find in life sometimes building blocks, like little bits of Lego, just start coming together and you start making a shape. And then suddenly it snowballs, And so I realized that was mine. And I think most of these superhumans, they may never tell you your reasons. And I think generally because these reasons probably, they might not perceive them to be cool or valid, but there'll always be something deep down. And I reckon more often than not, it's basically to make the mum and dad proud.
You talk about that moment of being like, you surprise yourself once, you surprise yourself twice, and the third time you start to like build a habit out of the whole thing. Do you think it gets easier to find comfort or maybe peace in the uncomfortable?
I think as long as things aren't getting progressively more uncomfortable, maybe I definitely would. I don't have the type of personality that deals with things getting progressively worse, and so my lovely static state was when I would be in a perpetual state of low-grade misery, punctuated by huge periods of clarity. And by that, I mean, I would be lying in a tent in, let's just say 10 degrees Fahrenheit in Wyoming, freezing cold, knowing that my water bottles were going to take about 3 hours before they'd actually be drinkable. And I'm thinking, there's no way I can do this. I can't do 40 miles today. But then you go, well, you did it yesterday. And you did it before, and it becomes that habit. And then you sort of realize that you have it in you, but it doesn't make it easy. You just have confidence that you can succeed. But once you start getting going, then you'd have your moments of clarity. And that would be the wonderful thing. So for those people who are in a spiral of things getting gradually worse, I take my hat off to you if you keep it on smiling. I want to give you the knowledge that it usually gets better.
You're living this life as a veterinarian. You sort of, like on level, you're like, oh yeah, well, I'm like making people's lives better, But then inside, it sounds like you're not. Was there a specific moment where you made a leap? Because that's a hard thing to do, to walk away from stability. Like, stability is a form of comfort, right? And to do that, I think, like, we talk to so many people. Like, how do you make the life you imagine? And I kind of centrally believe that there is some point where it's like you're gonna kind of have to make a leap into a place of uncertainty. And oftentimes that moment of like free fall, it's actually quite short. Sometimes it's longer. But I'm curious for you, what was it like?
Well, this is actually really important, and I hope that this might help somebody who's listened to this today. And so generally, we live our lives behind a wall, right? And this wall's put up by our parents, teachers, and friends and stuff to keep you safe. But like walls can be good things. They can also be really rubbish things, because on the other side of the wall is usually the good stuff, but we're quite happy. We are creatures of comfort, and we like being on our side of the wall with everything boring, everything in place. Now, as with life, things occasionally, deteriorate, change, and a brick might fall out of this wall. So you might, you might move to a different area through work, and you see a new opportunity, but it's too scary. You're behind your wall, and so naturally, you don't want to be having that sort of, occupying your thought space the whole time. So you pick a brick up and you put it back to safety behind your wall. And so what I found was, I was in Australia. I'd already bought this stroller as a little thing, so a brick had fallen out, and I had this notion of running across the country. And my visa was coming up, and we were debating whether we wanted to live in the UK or Australia. So we thought, well, we'll only know if we go back. We'll go back. I thought I was going back to my dream job. Even though the people I worked with, lovely, the job was an absolute pile of, yeah. And so a couple of bricks fell out of my wall, and I could see that this was the opportunity potentially to run across America. But, the cost associated with this, everything was so bad. And then when I saw the article, that was the equivalent of me going, I'm just going to push that wall down. And I had the leap. And as soon as I decided I did it, I booked the plane ticket that night or the next day. And as soon as I did it, the relief was palpable. Once you step onto the other side of that wall and you realize you haven't plummeted to your death, you go, oh, it's not much scarier than the other side of the wall. Now, I kicked the wall down. You don't have to go as scary as that. But these little bricks that fall out, you can use them as a ladder. Get over the other side of the wall, climb down gradually, and come back, and your normal life is still there on the other side. And this is the equivalent of going for mini adventures, change your life, go and be somebody else for a week, and climb back over your wall to safety.
Did your mom, you mentioned earlier, make your mom proud. Did your mom get to see you finish this run?
I know. She was the inspiration before it. She never got to see me sort of lace on my boots. So she passed not long after I qualified as a vet. So my final ever photo, actually, when you go to like vet school, you have the option to do another degree as part of the studies, and I did that. I had my graduation photo on my own. She got mouth cancer, and eventually it spread, but not before she fought it like an absolute Wolverine, and she ended up going back to grad law school and was basically on course to like sort of pass top of her grade before it came back. And when I eventually graduated as a vet, and I was having the photo, I beckoned for her to come into the photo, and she was just like, no, you don't want me in here, not looking like this, obviously. So that she'd been through the ringer, but she was still beautiful. And I said, no, Mum, get in. And I knew it was going to be the last photo I ever had with her. And sort of 2 months after that, she passed away. So I was never going to quit on this run unless I was physically broken or financially broken. Going back to your question before, the mental limit wasn't going to happen because I'd taken that out of the equation. I just basically said to myself, we're just not quitting this. It's like Apollo Creed in Rocky IV, don't throw the towel.
So on the most basic level, how do you tell people how to become superhuman?
Find your why. because, Steve, if somebody just listens to like the podcast and just goes, oh my God, this is incredible, I want to become superhuman. Well, you're not going to do it unless you have to. If you just go, I like the podcast, I'll dig into that. What did you like about the podcast? Maybe who, what aspect of that? Is that what you're into? And then if you get down to it, you've got your motivation. Then just going to go, just work towards it. It's taken me the best part of like 4 years to get back to the shape I'm in now, which still isn't the shape I was in. But I've got a why still, The why's less cool than it was last time. It's basically, I bought a stroller to run across Australia and I'll kick myself if I don't do it. It will nag at me. My other nag as well is I want to go from Monument Valley to the ocean one last time. And that's just so whenever I'm in the pub in 10 years' time, I don't have to explain to people why I ran across America 4.77 times, But it goes back to what I was saying before. Surprise yourself, because you might become superhuman when you're 80. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be setting any world record. Well, you might set an age world record, but you have got the potential to fulfill your greatest life achievement at any point from when you're born until when you die. And I was 38 when I started mine, so it's not necessarily peak sporting age. Ironically, or appropriately even, sort of, I'm nearly as bad at irony as Alanis Morissette there. Appropriately, it was the same age that Tom Hanks was when he started filming the movie, which was unknown to me until halfway through. And yeah, so don't limit yourself. Don't think, oh, I'm 62 now, I'm over the hill, I'm done. If you don't want to be done, you don't have to be done.
Thank you, Rob, for sitting down and talking Forrest Gump with us. Rob's new podcast, How to Be Superhuman, is up and running. You can find it wherever you get your shows. There's a link in the show notes. Our stories come from friends of friends, and you, our community. If you've got a tip or an idea for a story, drop us a line by visiting dirtbagdiaries.com and using the submission form. We love hearing from you. Today's music is from Brendan O'Connell. Our theme song is by Jacob Bain and Nis Cotto. This episode was produced by Marco Seiler Gonzalez and me, with editing and mixing by Skylar Perwins. Our executive producer is Becca Call. It's all made possible by our incredible Diaries Plus members who provide open access to the entire community. Seriously, you power this show. If you aren't already, please consider joining. It doesn't move forward without you, so thank you. I'm Fitz Call, and you've been listening to the Dirtbag Diaries. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around after the show to listen to And Then What. I will be blunt. I'm going to ask for your help right out of the gate. If you're listening to this right now, there may only be a few days, maybe even hours, to make a difference on today's And Then What topic. And I think a lot of people working on this issue feel like we actually can swing this for the better. So give a listen, think about taking action, and then take action. Let's dive in. So in April, it became clear that the Trump administration wanted to follow through on its stated desire to sell off public lands to the highest bidder in order to pay for tax cuts. The vast majority of Americans oppose the sale of public lands. This is as bipartisan an issue as we have in our country today. But the administration has been intent on forcing the issue, even though it is wildly unpopular. In April, a last-ditch effort to remove public land sell-offs from the budget process fell short, even though 2 Republican senators from Montana crossed party lines to support the measure. Now, as our elected officials go through the process of creating the federal budget, public land sales are now in the proposed House reconciliation budget. That's like a working draft that'll go to the Senate and then possibly to the president. We have a few chances to get that out of there. Sell, and it's gone forever. How did we get there? And how do we get out of this situation? Today we are joined by Louis Geltman, Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at Outdoor Alliance. Welcome to And Then What, the series where we follow up on the headlines.
So, Louis, my grandma used to tell me that nothing good happens after 2 a.m. In early May, in the dead of night, Republicans on the House Natural Resources Committee decided to approve a budget amendment that would sell off 500,000 acres of public land in Utah and Nevada. That's not like a little bit of land, that's quite a lot. It is the equivalent to Canyonlands, Arches, and Bryce Canyon National Parks. Obviously, there's been a lot of headlines about public land sell-offs, but at this moment, did it come as a surprise to you?
Man, I guess first of all, I feel like your grandma is a lot rowdier than me. I feel like for me at this point, it's nothing good ever happens after like 10 p.m. But yeah, I mean, it did come as a surprise to me. We've been tracking the reconciliation effort since we had any inkling it was going to happen.
And reconciliation, for people that don't know, is how the actual budget gets written, right? In Congress. It's a process where one side, the House, proposes one budget and one side, the Senate, proposes another, and then they sort of have to heal the two. Is that right?
That's more or less right. And the main thing about reconciliation is it's a process by which Congress can avoid the filibuster in the Senate. So this is the process by which Democrats passed the Inflation Reduction Act a few years ago. And so now the Republicans will try to use this same tool to hammer through as much of their agenda as they can. We saw the base text for the House Natural Resources piece of this reconciliation package. And it was probably the worst piece of legislation I've ever seen that actually has a chance of going anywhere. Mandatory oil and gas leasing, rollbacks to constraints on oil and gas leasing, attacks on NEPA, attacks on the boundary waters, rollbacks to land management plans. But we're seeing it and to be glass half full or glass a little tiny bit full. At least there were no direct public land sales in there. So we put together our letter on this bill, which is, again, like the worst thing we've ever seen. And we sit down to watch the markup where they vote on amendments to this package. And it's kind of playing out how I expect it would. And eventually I give up and go to sleep. Wake up the next morning and we find out that at 11:30 at night, a Republican amendment had been introduced, which would add more than 500,000 acres of public land sales to this already truly appalling piece of legislation. And we didn't see that coming.
In this era, not selling public lands is like the most bipartisan issue we have in our country these days. Was it a surprise that all of a sudden in the middle of the night they decided to include this?
It was and it wasn't. I feel like this conversation has been percolating up around selling public lands for a minute now. We went through a wave of this in the 1980s with the Sagebrush Rebellion. We went through another wave of this maybe 10 years ago with this idea around turning over public lands to the states, which is super problematic for a long list of reasons. And then recently, this has kind of started to percolate up again in a few different contexts. One, the idea of selling public lands as a way of financing tax cuts, essentially, which is what they're proposing here. But also there have been a number of ideas floating around to use public lands as a way to facilitate housing development. You know, it wouldn't be our position that that idea couldn't work or couldn't be acceptable someplace, somewhere, ever. But in general, it's not something that's going to fix the affordable housing problem in this country. So this idea is, I don't know, it's been floating around in the ether a lot lately.
To sort of give a sense, like 500,000 acres is like 2.5 New York cities in terms of housing. And like, that's not something that is all of a sudden going to happen quickly, right? It doesn't even guarantee that that stuff doesn't turn into a McMansion on 4 acres or that someone buys it and then resells it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The scale of what's going on here just evinces how disingenuous this whole conversation has been around using public lands for housing, because what they're talking about here is just, it's a complete mismatch with that conversation, right? It's never been the position of our organization that no acre of public land shall ever leave the federal estate. But there's a process for how we pursue these things. There's a law called the Federal Land Transaction Facilitation Act that allows for land exchanges and land sales with a lot of public process. But what we're talking about is doing something at a very modest scale with procedural safeguards and public input, and some conservation mixed in there. And this is really like wholesale transfer of public land.
Where were these lands that they've included? Have you guys been able to map them out yet?
We're just getting the maps together right now, and I haven't really had an opportunity to take a super deep dive with them right now. But I mean, a lot of this land is like around Las Vegas, and that's where I believe this 500,000 acres is primarily coming from. And I did the same calculus you just did, where I looked to see like how big is Las Vegas, and it's like 86,000 acres. So like we're not gonna 7x Las Vegas, right? Like that's not an affordable housing solution. That's something else entirely.
Which realistically, like they don't even have the water to do that. So obviously this is early in the stage here. And what would this look like? This land that's surrounding Las Vegas, would I get a Redfin notification and have a chance to put in an offer? Like, has there been any sort of thought put into how something like this might happen in this amendment?
I can't recall anything of this scale ever happening before, so I'm not exactly sure how it would all play out in practice. There are some requirements in there around alignment with county level planning objectives. So I think it would be a process that would play out over some time. But in the interim, I think that would certainly be at minimum like a sort of Damocles hanging over any potential conservation efforts, any potential recreation infrastructure investments, anything else you would want to see happen on these public lands, or see not happen on these public lands for that matter.
Mm-hmm. And what happens next? And how do we get to respond back to it?
So right now, essentially every committee in Congress is working on their chunk of the reconciliation bill. And once they're through with those pieces, it's going to really be up to leadership to knit all of that together and at some point decide what it is that they want to bring to the House floor. And something similar is going to happen on the Senate side. I think they're a little bit behind where the House is. So we haven't even seen what's happening from a natural resources standpoint on the Senate side. So as leadership embarks on this task of knitting all these pieces together, there's a real opportunity for members of Congress to be going to leadership and saying, I am not on board with these public land sell-offs. I don't want to see this in here. I can't take this vote. Or if you make me vote for this, you're going to put me in a really bad position with my constituents, and I don't want to have to take this vote. Please don't include this in here. Biggest thing to be focusing on right now is to be reaching out to Republican members of Congress and saying, I am up at arms about what's going on here. I'm not happy, and I need you, my member of Congress, to be going to leadership and telling them this cannot be in a reconciliation package for me to, if you want my vote on it. There's a solid and I think growing handful of Republicans who are pushing back to various degrees on this idea. First and foremost, maybe surprisingly, is Representative Ryan Zinke, the former Secretary of Interior, who's now a House member in Montana. And he has been extremely vocal in his opposition to selling public lands, including to this amendment. So he's really, to his credit, been a leader on this. The whole Montana delegation has been saying the right things here. So that's Senators Daines and Sheehy and Representative Troy Downing, who's the other House member from Montana. Representative Downing and Representative Zinke are both on the Public Lands and Public Hands Act, which is a piece of legislation that would limit agencies' ability to do public land sell-offs on their own. It's important that we praise those guys for taking that position and also make sure that they're taking it not just performatively, but are actually really working behind the scenes to get these out of here. In addition to those guys, Jeff Hurd, who's a Republican member from Western Colorado, voted no on the amendment that added in these public land sell-offs before ultimately voting for the entirety of the package. So he made some gestures in the right direction before ultimately caving, but he's somebody who is worth working on. Mike Simpson from Idaho has signed on to Public Lands and Public Hands and is somebody who's done a lot of good work for conservation over the years. Representative Zinke and Representative Vasquez from New Mexico have recently started a public lands caucus, which is just a collection of members of Congress who are inclined to work on an issue or support a certain cause. And there are, 4 other Republicans on there, aside from the folks I've already mentioned: Chuck Edwards from North Carolina, Jen Kiggins from Virginia, Dan Newhouse in Washington, and Juan Ciscomani from Arizona, who are all on the Public Lands Caucus. So, I think those are folks who, with some encouragement, could be really helpful on this.
I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that we, in the past, as a community and as a bigger part of community that is the recreation, conservation, hunters, anglers, all that, like, we have pushed back on these efforts before. So this is something that a lot of people standing up for can make a difference right now. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there was that proposal from House member in Utah, Jason Chaffetz, 7 years ago to sell off 3.3 million acres of BLM lands. And in a matter of weeks, he had to shamefacedly walk back this proposal. He had this picture of himself on Instagram, all geared up in his hunting gear with his dog, talking about how he loves public lands and he made a mistake here. And eventually he just got run out of Congress. And we can do this again.
Okay, so an update to the update, because it's all happening so fast we're trying to keep up. On Wednesday, May 21st, the public land sell-off piece was stripped from the House Reconciliation Budget Bill. It was an incredible win. There was a collective outpouring of hundreds of thousands of people across the political spectrum who made their voices heard, and politicians listened. So thanks to everyone who took action. That's incredible. But what's next? Now that this mega bill has passed the House, it goes to the Senate, and then there's still a lot in there that isn't so good if you love public lands. Cuts to staff and funding, rollback on environmental reviews, decreasing the royalties that oil and gas companies have to pay to use public lands. You heard that right. Cheaper and easier for extraction industries. Less income for the federal government. And then there's always the potential that the Senate could put public land sales back into the bill, which would be super messed up. What does that mean? We're not done yet. Now is the time to contact your senators and let them know you want public lands protected now and in the future. Live in a state where your representatives are friendly to those kinds of issues? Go ahead and give them a call and say thank you. Talk with a friend who lives in another state. It may feel like a small action, but it adds up. The fire has been lit, and we want to keep fanning those flames. You can follow Outdoor Alliance on Instagram or sign up for their action alerts at outdooralliance.org. They're great at breaking down these complicated topics and letting you know what you can do to help, which is something we all need right now. We're posting these pieces on our website, dirtbagdiaries.com, in case you want to share. And then what? Thanks for Lewis for joining us today, and the Diaries Plus members for making this reporting possible. Links are on our website and in the recent show notes. Thank you for caring about public lands.